Thank you for joining us here at O and Another Thing, here on O and Another Thing. Your host, Vince Petrone, Bertram Beans, our producer, Giovanna with us today to fact check us and keep us straight. We have a lot to talk about today, so we'll dive in first with some headlines. Where to start here? A study of 96,000 hospitalized coronavirus patients on 6 continents found that those who received hydroxychloroquine, the anti-malaria drug taken and promoted by Trump, had a significantly higher risk of death. I shouldn't laugh, compared with those who did not. But the only reason to laugh is that the sentence, the anti-malaria drug taken and promoted by Trump, had a significantly higher risk of death compared with those who did not. And it's funny because this is not new news for any of us, except maybe the president himself, who has apparently been ignoring this for the past, I feel like 2 months since we've known about hydroxychloroquine not being the full answer. Again, not a doctor here. None of us in the studio here are doctors. However, there's been a lot of research done by doctors, a lot of clinical studies done by doctors, and a lot of just investigating and research work done by doctors that points to hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine or whatever you want to call it. I know there's hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine. Either way, neither of the two is good at being an effective relief for these symptoms. People have even said that there's no real evidence that these drugs work for anything more than their intended purpose. That is an anti-malaria drug, or also for treating lupus. But there is no real evidence that it weakens the effect of coronavirus on your immune system, or slows the spread of it, or prevents it, or anything. The only evidence they have found really shows that it does more harm than good, and by harm we mean that it can actually kill you. So, do not take hydroxychloroquine, even though the president is doing it. We'll talk more about that later on in the podcast here. Trump ordered flags over federal buildings and monuments lowered to half staff from Friday through Sunday in memory of the Americans we have lost to the coronavirus. Now, worth noting here, the president likely wouldn't have done this had he not received a letter from Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, essentially guilting him into doing this yesterday. He would not have done it. I think it's fair to say that. I think it's just fair to say that the president would not have lowered these flags to half-mast because he's done everything in his power to not acknowledge the fact that there are close to 100,000 people dead from the coronavirus on his watch over the course of 2 months. Directly because of them, as some studies have cited that if he and his administration had taken steps just a couple of weeks earlier, 1 week would have saved, I think it was 36,000 lives, and 2 weeks earlier for a national shutdown could have saved more than half of the lives, I believe the Columbia study that I read this morning was saying. I digress. He would not have done this because everything him and his administration have done this week, last week, the week before that, every week since the coronavirus started, has been done to show that it's not that bad here, to show that the numbers are not that bad, that the administration is doing a good job. Even when the president argues about per capitas, it's just to try to show that he is doing a better job than he is, because he is not doing a good job, which is why everything this week has been to distract us from that. You can even look back to Obamagate. I don't think Obamagate is more than a week and a half old at this point. It might be 2 weeks at most, but it hasn't taken long for that even to already be clearly what it is, which is a farce, a phony conspiracy to rile up the media, to get them to cover anything else other than the great national tragedy, great national debacle, great federal governing failure that has been the coronavirus and the coronavirus response. Now, we are fully able here on Own Anything to admit that the coronavirus is not Donald Trump's fault. He did not cause the coronavirus. He did not make it in the lab that he claims it was made in. He did not rip open the bat that it might have come from. However, everything him and his administration have done, started from downplaying that virus to ignoring it and launching phony investigations into political opponents and rivals over the past 2 weeks. They've done everything to discount that this is really happening and downplaying it, saying it's the same as the flu. Whenever we received even more evidence that it's not the same as the flu. Where's it at here? The New England Journal of Medicine is saying that the coronavirus attacks lining of blood vessels inside patients' lungs. The flu doesn't attack the lining of blood vessels inside of your lungs. That's not something the flu does. That's something coronavirus does. That's something that I'm sure it's a form of cancer that does that. Is that what cancer is? Does cancer affect? I don't know enough about cancer apparently, but doesn't it affect blood cells? This is affecting blood cells. I'm not saying this is cancer or anything.
The flu also has a vaccine.
The flu also has a vaccine, worth noting, whereas coronavirus does not have a vaccine. Thank you for that. We have record unemployment right now, leading to the largest one-month increase in U.S. mortgage delinquencies ever, as the number of borrowers who stopped paying their home loans spiked by 1.6 million. 1.6 million people didn't pay their home loans last month. That means 1.6 million people, if there weren't, well, I don't know if it's a national moratorium on evictions. I know there is in New York, you can't get evicted. But if we run into a place where we start having mass homelessness on top of this, truly fucked. Truly a bad situation. It's already a bad situation with homelessness in this country. If you look at, California, just look at the cities. New York, California, even some places in the Midwest, some smaller places struggle with homelessness. Or I don't even know if being underhomed, underhoused is a thing, but people that have to bounce from like housing unit to housing unit or from place to place. There are a lot of situations those are situations that already cause more complications when it comes to trying to limit the spread of a pandemic. Imagine that whenever people don't have a place to go to because they couldn't afford to pay their home loans because they lost their job because of a pandemic and because of fallout from a pandemic that could have been prevented if the government had acted properly. But we'll digress from that for now because there is a couple of other things we'd like to talk about this weekend. It relates to what we've been talking about, but we'll start with the unmasking that turned out to not be an unmasking and turned out to be a whole bunch of nothing. So this week, acting DNI Rick Grinnell declassified a slew of emails relating to the president's ongoing Obamagate investigation. I don't even know if it's an investigation or just them saying they're doing it. It's an investigation that each day is exposed more and more as a witch hunt that it truly is. This declassification, an obvious attempt to move the narrative away from the president's response to the coronavirus, was clearly meant to be a smoking gun. What we found, or what they uncovered or declassified this week, was clearly supposed to be the smoking gun of Obamagate. As one of these emails that was declassified included literally every person that could be involved in a Democratic Party scandal. Any person that Republicans have been trying for the past 3 years to catch in some kind of form of corruption to make their corruption seem more acceptable. President Obama, Susan Rice, Jim Comey, Sally Yates, Joe Biden, all of them are cited in this email from Susan Rice herself to Susan Rice herself that she sent to herself on Inauguration Day, on Trump's Inauguration Day. The email cites this conversation that Republicans and Trump and people that want Obamagate to be true would cite as being a swarmy, backroom, swamp-type conversation. Whenever the conversation described by Rice in this email seems to be anything but that. In fact, that email even cites Obama himself insisting that the ongoing investigation into Russian hacking and the 2016 election be handled by the book. He insisted that things just be done how they're supposed to be done. That's all he wanted. All he asked in that meeting with Sally Yates, the Attorney General at the time, with Jim Comey, the head of the FBI at the time, with I forget what Susan Rice was doing. I know she wasn't Secretary of State, but I can't think of what Susan Rice was in the administration. It's really driving me nuts. Who else was there? And Joe Biden, the vice president at the time, who's now trying to be the next president, trying to take Trump out. So all of these people have been targets.
She served as National Security Advisor.
Oh, she was National Security Advisor. Okay, so she was the National Security Advisor, Susan Rice. Of course, that's why she got wrapped up in Benghazi. That's why. Okay, so.
Oh, well, she was also U.S. Ambassador to the UN before then.
Yeah, I knew she was the ambassador to the UN before.
And then after that, National Security Advisor.
Yeah. Okay, so she was the security. When was she the ambassador to the UN?
That was 2009 to 2013, and then National Security Advisor was 2013 to 2017. So she was with him his entire.
Yeah, I knew he was there. She was there the whole time. I couldn't remember what she was there doing. I didn't know it was two things. Anyway, thank you. So all the people are around. All the people that, going back to Benghazi that Republicans have been trying to take down or hold accountable or whatever, are all involved in this. So you'd think that this would be the perfect thing for Republicans. The perfect piece of evidence for Obamagate to really rile up their bases. But then you get down to the actual reading and it proves to be anything but that. And then you read further into the email, or I guess at the start of the email there's a point where Susan Rice even cites that Obama said that he wasn't there to inspire or instruct or have any effect on the investigation. He wasn't there to steer it in any way. He just wanted to hear what was going on with it. He wanted to know if his reservations about the incoming Trump team having full conversations with Russians about sanctions being lifted off of them once they were in power. Obama had his concerns about that. As rightfully he should have his concerns about that, because again, that is a corrupt thing for an incoming president's administration to be doing. You even see further down in the email that Comey says that he has reservations and that the team should have reservations about sharing particular information with the incoming Trump team, because there is an obvious mole in that Trump team. A mole that they already knew was Mike Flynn. They already knew it was Mike Flynn because he was named in an FBI document a week or so earlier. Now, what's interesting about that FBI document? That's the same FBI document that Republicans and Trump used to start this whole thing off. To say that there was an illegal unmasking. That people in the Obama administration, with just 2 weeks left in their time in the White House, illegally unmasked this person in an FBI report, showing that person to be Michael Flynn, leading them to start a witch hunt against Michael Flynn. When it turns out that Michael Flynn wasn't even the masked name in the FBI memo. His name wasn't the one that needed to be unmasked. His name was the name that was named. They knew that Michael Flynn was having a conversation with Sergei Kislyak, the ambassador to Russia, about removing sanctions placed on Russia by the Obama administration because of evidence Obama's administration had of Russia trying to hack the 2016 election. They would remove those sanctions after this conversation. So, it was a long way to get there. But there is evidence of that. There is already evidence of that being what had happened. They already knew it was Mike Flynn who did it. And then came Mike Flynn knowingly lying to the FBI, which is the other problem that Trump and his administration have with the Russia investigation, is that they feel that Michael Flynn was manipulated into lying to the FBI. And can I tell you that you are never really manipulated into lying by anybody other than yourself, because the best way to get a lie going is to be scared of that truth. So, you can't lie without knowing that you're lying, essentially. So the argument that Mike Flynn was tricked into lying doesn't hold any water to begin with. But then you add in that he was unmasked, that he wasn't the unmasked person, that the Obama administration just wanted this to be a by-the-book investigation done properly to make sure that they weren't handing the country over to people that wanted bad things to happen to this country, i.e. the Russians. Seems like something that good governing would do. Now we know that Republicans, Donald Trump, and good governing are hard to mention in the same sentence. It's worth noting that Obamagate, these investigations, all this talk of what happened, all this declassifying of emails, is again happening during the middle of literally the worst pandemic to ever happen to the United States. I guess you could say the flu of 1918, because that had 2 waves. So we're not there yet. But it's been pretty costly. It's already crumbled our economy. It's already, again, taken close to 100,000 lives. More than 1 million infected. And yet, the Republican Party and Donald Trump have spent the past 2 weeks not coming up with a plan to get what could be 40% of the workforce back to work. They have not been coming up with a national plan for testing. They have not been coming up with a way for them to fund more testing, to fund states to get more unemployment benefits out to people. In fact, they've been ignoring the fact that there is a House-approved bill sitting on their desk right now that would extend the unemployment benefit, the extra $600 through August. There is a bill sitting on their desk that would give funding to states. There is a bill on their desk, on Mitch McConnell's desk, that would give more adequate funding to testing. There is a bill on their desk that would increase food bank money to food banks, do a whole slew of good, and also, I know they don't want to do this, we'll talk about this in a second here, but it would also give vote by mail a chance to happen and give funding to that. But we'll digress from there. There is all of this on their desk, all of this on Republican senators' desk, all of this on Donald Trump's desk, all of this on their plate to handle and take care of. But instead, they investigate crimes that all the evidence points to not having even happened. So they're wasting time and resources that could be better spent, I don't know, saving America from a fucking pandemic. But instead, they choose to do this. So whenever they talk about what they've done and how great a job they've done on the virus, remember that they spent 2 weeks going after an administration that hasn't been in power for 4 years, that went by the book to investigate the things they had to investigate and rightfully investigated within the Trump administration, their relations to Russian hackers in 2016, and that they did nothing wrong. And that is the worst thing for Republicans to have to know, is that there was nothing done wrong, because the whole reason that this got started was to show that Democrats can be just as bad as Republicans, can be just as corrupt as Republicans. Instead of passing these bills, instead of doing work to help get America back on track, to get people back to work, there was, I think we talked about it already in the podcast, but I'll state it again. There was a study this week showing that there's a good chance that 40% of the jobs lost, 40% of these 40 million unemployed people won't go back to the jobs they lost, because those jobs won't be there for them anymore. There's a very good chance that, again, 40% of the 40 million people unemployed right now don't go back to work in the capacity they were working before, which means that there will be, 16 million? We came through that? 16 million people looking for new jobs at some point in the near future, meaning 16 million more people in the employment market, meaning 16 million more people to compete with. And I want there to be this to be known, that there is no jobs program in any form of plan. There is no jobs program down the pike. There is no infrastructure project. There is nothing planned to get those people back to work. But instead of figuring out a way to get those people back to work, instead of figuring out a way to make sure that people can come back to a normal reality, one where they are safe, one where they can go about close to their normal activities, there is not a plan for that. And that is the real scandal here. This shouldn't be the Obamagate scandal that people are following. Hopefully, after this week and after the new revelations and all the holes being poked into it, it will go away now. But I hope people remember that this is what Republicans and Donald Trump spent the past 2 weeks doing. While close to, I think, 15,000 more Americans have died in the past 2 weeks from the coronavirus, or close to it, Donald Trump and his administration and the Republican Party did nothing except approve judges, get a new DNI, John Ratcliffe approved, and took a recess to go home for Memorial Day instead of doing anything. And while they did that, they also approved for the Senate Intel Committee to be able to subpoena Hunter Biden and ex-Obama administration officials. That's what the Republican Party and Donald Trump focused on this week, instead of fixing the country and trying to get the economy back on track and showing an ounce of empathy for the nearly 100,000 people dead. That should be the real scandal, and I hope that becomes the real scandal, and people, I think it has become most of it at this point too. I don't want to say that we're ignoring, no one's really ignoring how bad of a job the president is doing, but he's still at a 39% approval in some cases, and I know that is not great. But wouldn't it be great to see him down around 34? And maybe this just shows his ceiling electorally. Maybe this just shows that Donald Trump is bound to get 39 to 45% of the vote no matter what. So maybe that should be something to scare Democrats into voting. I know a lot of the polling right now shows Biden ahead. Some of the polling shows Biden ahead by double digits, but I hope that doesn't get Democratic voters thinking that we are suddenly safe. Because as we've seen this week, when Trump needs to rally the troops, he can rally the troops pretty effectively. It's sad and upsetting, but it is true. And it might be another really good example of why Trump and the Republican Party are practically made for one another, which is also very sad and frightening thing to say about anybody, but we'll dive on into that subject here. The president, as we know, has a history of putting his foot in his own mouth and not being able to get out of his own way, or in some instances, get out of his own party's way, which he wasn't able to do this week, and he did this week. The president threatened to hold up federal funding of both Michigan and Nevada in retaliation against the two states' efforts to make mail-in voting more accessible for voters in their states, citing that the state's efforts to expand the availability of voting is illegal, as well as saying that ballots were being mailed into voters in Michigan when, in fact, only the applications were being sent out. So in his early morning anti-democracy Twitter rant that the president did, he not only showcased that he is a wannabe authoritarian who's very worried about his grip on power, but that he is also too dumb to actually know what it is he's worried about with voter fraud. But he also highlighted one of the major hypocrisies of Trump and the GOP as a whole. And this is easy to say because I'm not surprised that the president would make these comments. Is it surprising that the most Republican president in the history of modern-day Republican presidents is against more effective and available democracy? No, absolutely not. Am I surprised that the president that spent a good chunk of time as president trying to establish an illegal diplomatic back channel in Ukraine to exchange military aid for manufactured dirt on a political rival, ultimately leading to his own impeachment, would try to do the same crime, this time with U.S. states? Am I surprised by that? No, of course not. However, I am surprised at the callousness about it. Plus, the sheer political miscalculation. So 2 questions here, as this runs right into 2 of the president's own pillars, if you will, if he has pillars. For one, there is his stance of being a populist. This we already know is a farce. He uses to get undereducated folks to to see him as one of them, who just got lucky to be spotted $60 million by his dad to start a real estate business. Who knows how this world would be different if Fred Trump didn't find $60 million under a hay bale in Queens that day? Who knows where we'd be? Wouldn't a populist want a larger voice to be heard? So said populist could truly be a populist, the popular voice truly prevailing? Yes, that would be correct of any other person who is a populist. However, when the populist in question is a man most famous for slapping his name on tall buildings, bankrupting them, then running off before the repercussions, I would say either all bets are off or you are dealing with a phony populist. One that manipulated his way into a position to make himself an oligarch of the world's most powerful nation. A literal narcissist's dream. Then, secondly, as a Republican, the president is supposed to be the staunchest supporter of states' rights in all of the land. That would be what you take from his phony populist worldview. And do not forget that lawmakers in the South worked tooth and nail in localities to change how the Civil War would be taught in schools to show that this was the principle that the Civil War was fought over. Many of those lawmakers were part of a newly radicalized wing of the Republican Party, teaching that instead of the war being over slavery, the thing that the war was definitely about, it was that the North, the Yankees, the North, were fighting the South because they didn't want the South to be allowed to independently govern themselves as free states anymore. They wanted them to have to comply with the federal standards. What was it that the North was most against the South doing? The states' right that the South so badly wanted to protect and preserve, so much so that they were willing to not be America anymore. Let's not forget that. People always forget that when they talk about the Civil War, that the South was no longer part of America, and we should start teaching it that way. America has only been a united America for not that long and still really isn't. So to say it wasn't, we weren't America during the Civil War because it was the United States versus the Confederacy. The Confederacy decided they didn't want to be a part of the United States, so we shouldn't consider them part of United States history. There it is. All right. Woo! But what was that right that they fought so hardly for in the South that they were willing to not be Americans anymore? The right to own slaves. That was the states' right that started the Civil War. So anytime it's taught in schools going forward, I hope that they get it right, because this is something that is a real problem. Absolutely a real problem. I know for a fact because in my school they even taught us that it wasn't just about slavery, it was about the states' rights aspect of slavery. It wasn't so much about, enslaving people. It was that they wanted to be free to do it. That's what the Civil War is about. And that is the cornerstone states' right. That's the states' rights that started them all. And that is really the basic backbone of the modern day Republican Party. Do not forget that the Republican Party's, originally, their platform and stance was that they were against big government. They were against the federal government coming in and telling states how to act. Now, what's worth noting here is that in the Constitution there is only a few actual key states' rights described. One of these key states' rights that actually exists is for states to conduct their own elections without federal interference, unless, of course, the Congress sees fit. And there is a special circumstance, like a pandemic, where they may need to change the ways people vote on a national scale. So does it make sense for the leader of the states' right party to take on one of the state's greatest rights? I would say no. So where is the party's outrage over the president insisting that states do not have the right to run and govern over their own elections, as Nevada and Michigan are trying to show that they can do? And while we're here, let's implore other states to just do it yourselves, because what we're seeing is that we're not going to get vote-by-mail funding passed or through Mitch McConnell's desk, because he, again, understands that if people vote, he won't get to be in the Senate if people vote. That's just how it works. So if you are a state right now, and for some reason you are listening to Oh and Another Thing, do as much as you can to get your state itself to do vote-by-mail voting, because, again, constitutionally, it is up to the states to hold free and fair elections. This is a defense that the Republicans used whenever they fought against having added securities against election interference. One of the things Mitch McConnell cited like a year and a half ago now, whenever I think it was 2018, 2019, whenever they were talking about passing money to shore up our election securities, was that it shouldn't be the federal government's job to prop up local election infrastructure. It should be up to the local election officials themselves, not the federal government. So the president really has no basis to threaten federal aid against the state trying to run an independent, fair election. The answer to the question is a little bit deeper than that even. And it draws from the answer to the first question. And the question, again, we're asking here is, where is the Republican Party outrage over Donald Trump attacking probably the most fundamental and only state's right, and that is the state's right to conduct its own free and fair election? The answer is deeper and draws from the answer to the first question. One, the Republican president is a phony populist. That's the first thing. He seeks total control and no accountability. In fact, he might just be a phony. I don't even say he's just a phony populist. He's just a phony person. So he would have done literally anything to become president, and will say and do anything to be reelected president, unless it requires benefiting the greater good, in which case he won't do it. There is nothing real about Donald Trump, aside from the hate and bias. I think that is all real. If not, what a really shit character to choose to play. But thus making him, again, this phoniness, this not being real, this being boy, I don't even know how to describe what he is. Because he's not an industry concoction. He's not a Lana Del Rey type, if you will. Hey, he's not some think tank creation.
Remember, he was quoted years ago saying that he could run for president as a Republican, and they're so stupid he could win.
He did say that, and it's true.
He's a businessman. That's what everybody said. That's my dad and everybody said when he was running. He's not a politician. He's a businessman.
He's not a politician. He's a businessman.
It'll be a welcome change. But he's not even a good businessman.
He's not even a good businessman. Anyway, so whatever he actually is, this phony, baseless, whatever he needs to do to get ahead version of a person, makes him the perfect patsy for bad governing for the GOP. He will be their vessel, and he will be their face to do what they want, as long as he gets to be the center of attention of all of it. There was a really good tweet from Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii, and it said pretty much summed up the Republican Party strategy, and that is just to get judges confirmed. And we talked about this before. They get the judges confirmed, that way they can limit the voice of the American people in the election. If the American people say something that the conservative minority doesn't agree with, they will just take it to court and they will just strike down any Democratic ruling that they don't like. The same thing can be said about them not being real. Can be said for the Republican Party of today, because it itself isn't real. It's a group of a few small people in a covered wagon. Small, rich people in a covered wagon throwing dollar bills at the back and yelling commands at the people running behind it. It is pretty much just that scene from Secession where Logan makes Tom Gregg and what's-his-face. Damn it.
Logan makes Tom Gregg. What do you mean what's-his-face? Who?
Tall, gray-haired man that's always hanging out with Logan, one of Logan's advisors. He looks like the guy that killed Natalie Wood, but isn't the guy that killed Natalie Wood. Damn it.
What did he make him do?
When they play Bore on the Floor.
When they play what?
Bore on the Floor.
Oh, yeah.
You know who I'm talking about? Whatever that character is. So anyway, there's a scene in Secession where Logan, one of the lead characters, makes Tom, Gregg, and this other dude play Bore on the Floor, which is just he throws a sausage and he makes them roll around on the floor and act like pigs, so they fight for the sausage so that they can prove that they didn't leak a story. I don't want to spoil too much because it's a really good show, but it's supposed to prove something to Logan. Anyway, that's essentially what the Republican Party has become. So if you want to just imagine like Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and some other faceless white guy just like Chuck Grassley fighting over a sausage, feel free to envision that. But that is why states' rights don't actually matter to the Republican Party. They matter until they don't, I should say, which is when the power of these wealthy donors is threatened. That's whenever the states' rights don't matter anymore. Your rights as a citizen don't matter once those rights start threatening the corporations, once they start threatening the business people, once they start threatening the billionaires that give money to these Republican election campaigns. That's whenever states' rights stop mattering. That's why it doesn't matter that the president has threatened to take funding away from states who have sought out to make voting easier. In this case, it happens to be a little more cynical than usual, I'd say. I don't think the president usually knows he is the patsy that he is. But when it comes to voter suppression, I believe he does. And by threatening to take federal funding away from states that are already in the process of expanding vote-by-mail or just carrying out vote-by-mail provisions, in the case of Michigan, who is, again, just sending out the application to get the vote-by-mail ballot, the president is sending one of his famous signals. That signal is if your state takes measures to make voting more accessible, thus increasing the likelihood of more people voting, then the federal government and the Trump administration will watch your state bleed dry. Donald Trump and the Republican Party are perfect for each other. They are morally bankrupt and stand for wherever the next dollar is going to come from. However, they also understand how power works and how power is lost. That the more people who vote, the less likely they are to win. And something is very off with that if we are a democracy. Thank you for joining us today on and Another Thing. We had a great pod with you. We had a great YouTube. Please, you've made it this far. Check us out on Medium. Subscribe to both the podcast and the YouTube. Thank you again for joining us. We'll be back next Tuesday with who knows what. Hopefully, we'll be able to talk about something other than Republican Party just bottom feeding. So, thank you again for listening. We'll be back next week. Subscribe, share, comment, share, subscribe, comment on all platforms. Thank you for listening. And Another Thing. Have a great weekend. Have a great Memorial Day. Be safe.